Jon Mendez here with the next of our how-tos. We've been experiencing a little bit of fuel issues, a bit of surging, a bit of hunting at speed. That suggests we've got a little issue with our fuel supply. So I'm going to take you through the basics, swap for life jacket for the overalls, and take you through what you can do to keep your boat safe fuel-wise at sea, what you really need to be able to do yourself, as there's often no easy help. So one of the first things that we need to do before we work on the fuel is turn it off. So while it's pulled at the helm, you can see here what happens, and then what I like to do is go and find that and manually just make sure it's gone all the way around so it's fully off 90 degrees across the pipe. To change the filters, obviously I need a selection of tools. The filters themselves, this is the coarse, this is the fine, the seals which fit so that they don't leak at all, a filter cartridge removal tool, obviously some paper towel to clean up with, and I'd recommend you wear gloves because diesel's not very nice on the hands. Now on this boat, like nearly all, the fuel is filtered first with a coarse filter, so it's coming through on one of these pipes, and this is a very simple centrifuge filter which spins the water out and it collects in the bottom, and in the top there's a paper element which collects any dirt and particles. From that point, the fuel is clean enough to go towards the engine, so it comes back out of the unit, follows along the pipes, and then follows onto the pipe down there, which has got the lift pump underneath it. So that pipe there and the lift pump, that's the low side pressure of the system, and that produces the fuel which comes into our fine filter just here, and on the top there's the bleed screw. So by using the lift pump and the bleed screw, we can remove any air from the low pressure side of the system. Any time we disturb the fuel system, we'll need to take the air back out after. After the fine filter, it goes into the main fuel injection pump, and from there it comes up here into the injectors, and each cylinder has an injector. Now diesels pump far more fuel than we need, so this very fine pipe here, that returns any excess fuel back to the pump, and from this pipe here it's returned to the tank. So all your fuel is constantly doing a circle and being cleaned each time. So making sure that the filters are working correctly and that you're on top of them is essential to making sure your boat works well. This is an older style engine where it's a mechanical injection system. If you've got fully electronic like some of the newer systems, the low pressure side will be very similar. The high pressure side you can't adjust at all. Now I mentioned the high pressure pump. You don't want to play with the high pressure pump. It's all very sophisticated stuff in there. It needs either removing and giving to specialist people or having someone that's got the right equipment to test it. So strongly advised, don't play with the high pressure pump. Stick on the low pressure side, and that's generally where all your problems come. So I'm going to change the coarse filter, then I'm going to change the fine filter. That's my plan of action, and then we'll restart the engine to make sure it all works. Now you'll see I've gloved up because I'm doing diesel. So what I've got a wrench on the bottom which allows me to undo this filter. Here it comes. Just about manage that by hand now. And you see I've got my little bucket wedged in underneath, because as we do this, there's bound to be a bit of fuel coming out. Now I've just got that loosened, I can do it by hand. Here it comes. Here comes that bit of fuel. I said you always get a bit. Ooh, there we go. Drop that all in there. Now, when you look at that, you'll see there's a big black ring around the outside, and that's what does the sealing. So we need to make sure that we lubricate that on the new one when we put it back on. So I'm going to use a little bit of diesel just to lubricate our new filter. So just rub a little bit on there. It's all nice and clean in here because it's been filtered through that fine filter that we just took off. What that does is it means it will seal nicely. Now the most important thing is that you don't cross the threads. So I'm just feeling for it, and then I'm turning very gently, and I can feel straight away that that's bit nicely. So I'm just spinning it on. Doesn't need to be massively tight at this point. I just feel now I'm getting a little bit of tension at the top. So now I'm going to take a bit of paper towel, because obviously I've got my hands are a bit diesely, and now I'm just going to rotate that filter just about a quarter of a turn, so it's hand tight. There we go, hand tight only. We don't want to go mental on it. Now what I'll need to do now is bleed that fuel. So that's the little pump lever with my spanner on here to let the air out. So that's be the next step. So to do the bleeding, it's nearly always a 10mm spanner. Ring spanner's good so you don't round the nut off. So we're going to open the nut, just a little twist, not massive, and then all we do is on the little priming pump, which on this model is a lever, we just pump from here, and you'll see little bubbles of fuel start to appear at this point. Once it becomes a steady stream, we then take the spanner, and while we're pushing up on the pump, we tighten up, and that's the air out. So normally, when we have a problem with fuel at all, it's the coarse filter which is the first one to show signs of problems. If it was clear, we'd hopefully see water collecting in the bottom, which would indicate a problem. There is a drain spanner on this that we can open it with and have a little drain, but I'm just going to go straight for a filter change. So to do that, we undo the top here. It's just a simple undo, and it's threaded all the way down. The top lifts off, and inside there is a filter which we change. It's just a paper based element. It's made out of special waterproof paper, but it works very effectively. And obviously we're introducing air, so we're going to have to bleed the fuel just as the same as when we do the fine filter a bit later. So I'm going to take the top off, change the element, and then we will be able to see how dirty it was and the issues that we have. So first part of this is we just undo the top of the filter. And you heard that little gasp there, I hoped. That shows the fuel system was nicely pressurised. That's good, it works. And when we remove this, you'll see there's a little O-ring just on the top of there. There's always a new one in the pack. So in the pack you always get a new baby O-ring and a big ring to go around the top of the seal. That must be replaced. So we'll pop that to one side, ready for a new O-ring in a minute. And then we work the top off. And that's where the top, and that's where the second black ring sits. So then we replace that piece as well. And then a little screwdriver is very handy. What that allows us to do is pick out these two little handles. And what the little handles actually do is allow you to ease very gently the filter up. So as it comes up, just let it drain the fuel back into the housing. There we go. And then when we look at this, you can see not too bad. It's not too black, but there is a little bit of discoloration there. So what happens with that is that will go in my little bucket, and then we will prepare for the new one. So the new one looks like this, and it will say on it how many microns it is, and this says 10, and that's quite important. If you have something that's too coarse, 30 for example, you're letting too much dirt through the system. If you have one that's too fine, 5 micron or 2 micron even, it will block really, really quickly. So the very fine filter, which is actually on the engine, that does the fine bit of filtering, and this one does the coarse. So little trick, if you, well, that one's broken, that's a bit of a pain. If you actually cross these over like so, and then when you pop it in, and then when you pop the lid back on, you put that brass T-handle through it. When you come to take the next one out, these are popped up ready for you. It's just a little trick, especially at sea, it makes it much simpler. So to pop this back in, all we do is lower it gently down. There we go, it's quite a tight fit. And then we push that all the way down, being very careful to push slowly because otherwise the fuel will come out. Then we redo our 2 O-rings, one on the lid itself and one on the housing, and then these two will all go back on board. So I said I was going to swap it to a clear bowl, so I've undone the bottom of that filter. You would never need to do that. But inside, this is the centrifuge part, and there's a ball in there to stop it. And I don't know if you can see in the bottom of there, that's why I've been experiencing problems with the fuel. Absolutely full of disgusting, horrible crud. You can just see it there. And that's what's been causing blockages. So my filter was quite disgusting when I actually took it out and examined it. And there you can see the remains that was in the bottom. So we've got a nice clear one now, and we'll show you that when we reassemble. Okay, you can just see I've put a layer of grease around there. So now what I do is pop that through. Didn't do a little bit of grease on the ring, so we'll do that as well. A bit on there. Pop that through there. And then, if you remember, I had my little trick which allowed me to be able to pull it out. So I've just folded them over, and then I just drop that in between them. That's it. Hold down, gently spin. When I'm doing it up, we just do it tight by hand, and then just a little tighten so that it's nice and secure. We've changed the bowl as well, so we've got a nice clear bowl. Not necessary for you, but the principle of what we do next is exactly what you do. So we open the bleed screw on the top of here. Remember I used the ring spanner? That's on there. And then we wiggle and pump on this little handle here. So we're pumping up and down, and you will see the fuel coming through on the system. And that tells me straight away that we've got a system which we haven't made an airlock in, because if there was an airlock we'd be getting no fuel through. So I just keep pumping on this little handle down here. You'll see my hand wiggling up and down. One could cheat and just turn it over on the engine, and that might well draw the fuel through a lot quicker. And remember, I've now got to get to the very top of that filter before we get any further. Now that I've got the prime filter full, I'm still pumping, and I'm looking at the little bleed screw here on the fine filter side. Now I've done both filters. If I was at sea, I'd have done just the coarse filter first. It's quite easy, don't actually need any tools. It's just spin the top off with the T-piece, pop a new filter in, then just pump. Obviously opening this bleed screw. As I'm pumping now, can you see that little bubble? So that means I'm getting air out. I'm just going to do a little mopping. Now I'm getting a steady stream of fuel. Yeah, that's coming through nice and steady. So I'm going to put the spanner on. One last pump. Tighten off. And that means, look tidy up, that we should have bled all the air out of the system and the engine will refire. One little top tip that I found really useful, it's really easy to lose track of when you last did this, so I just take a Sharpie pen and I'll just put the date on the filter. So I'm just going to stick what we're on now, and that will allow me to remember when I should do them again. So we've bled all the fuel system. It will probably crank for a little bit longer when I go to start, because although we haven't touched the high pressure side, where the low feeds the hide, we've introduced a bit of air, hopefully bled all the air out. There's probably a tiny bit which will need to work its way through. So I turn the key to our ignition, select station, and then crank. Stalls first time, not an issue. I can just give it a couple of revs just to make sure there's no air. Very pleased with that. The extra revs just allowed me to make sure that any air that was still there has bled through the system, and she'll run beautifully now. Very pleased.